esposo, que los dos son personas que tienen siempre en su corazón el bienestar de la comunidad. Y conozco la nueva concejal de Fairhaven de la parte 14 para los quienes pueden votar, dividen nuestros vecindarios por distritos de votación, y Sarah Miller, nuestro concejal de la parte 14, representando parte de Fairhaven. What a pleasure to have today with us a newly elected uh, Board of Alderwomen, uh, Sarah Miller, representing Ward 14, part of Fairhaven. Welcome, Sarah, and what a great opportunity for many of the folks who are listening to get to know you better, especially those who reside in Ward 14, because I have the fortunate blessing of knowing you through not only the fact that I used to work with your husband, but also I've seen you in many community events, not only yourself, but also your children that you've been raising as activists. They have the strong activist spirit. I don't know if it was because you and your husband are raising them, or they were just born that way. But it runs deep in the blood. Welcome, Sarah. Bienvenida, Sarah.
Yes, gracias por invitarme. Me alegro estar aquí con usted. And it's always good to be with you, Caprice. I so appreciate all the work that you do, and I just appreciate the invitation to talk and to talk about some of the things we've been working on in the neighborhood.
That's awesome. And before we start, I'm going to share a personal piece where you and we had a conversation, and we briefly talked about needing to increase the voice of people who are committed in the neighborhoods, who are from the neighborhoods, who understand the issues that New Haven folks face. And beyond just, they work here, but more of they know and understand the difficulties and the challenges, and also the strength that folks from New Haven have, the resiliency that folks from New Haven have. And you had actually asked me if I would ever consider running for office. And I'm like, that's a lot of sacrifice that I can't do at this time. I felt I had done a lot of work in the community, and my life was not in balance, where I needed to take care of my personal life a little more. And I was in a different stage in my life journey. And I said, no, I can't at this time, and I don't know if I ever will. And I used to work at a nonprofit that supported women specifically to run for office, a training program that I helped launch in Massachusetts called Emerge Massachusetts, and now there's an Emerge Connecticut. And research showed that most women, it takes, on average, 8 people to convince them to run for office. And I'll ask the listeners, how many people do you think it takes for a male to decide to run for office? 1, the person in the mirror looking at them. So I pointed the finger and the question back at you, Sarah, and I said, when will you run?
What did I say? I can't remember.
And you said, you have a young family. And it would mean, and I understood the level of sacrifice with a young family. And you actually then continued to list off names of other people you wanted, other females that you wanted to see run for office. And I'm so glad that you finally said yes. And I'm sure it took about 8 people to convince you to run, if not more. And part of those 8 people, I'm sure, must have included the young males that you're racing, raising at home, the strong activists, and seeing their beautiful faces in the morning, and committed to the public school system and improving our schools and our neighborhoods. And so I want to hear more about what convinced you to finally run, to finally say yes. What is the inspiration that brought you to finally say, hey, I'm going to put my hat in the ring? Quisiera hablar un poco contigo, concejal Sara, de por qué por fin decidiste lanzarte directamente para ser uno de nuestros concejales aquí en la ciudad de New Haven, porque nosotros tuvimos, voy a hablar un poco a nivel personal, tuvimos una conversación hace un par de años cuando me pediste a mí para lanzarme una elección. Y yo dije, yo entiendo el nivel de sacrificio, especialmente para una mujer, en decir sí para ser una persona elegida, para tener una campaña y para implementar el plan de acción que uno quiere implementar como una persona elegida en nuestro gobierno. Hace años yo empecé con un grupo de personas, una organización específicamente para apoyar a mujeres a que se lancen a la política y mantenerse en la política. Y esa organización se llama Emerge Massachusetts. Y de ahí ahora se encuentra una organización que existe ahora aquí en Connecticut que se llama Emerge Connecticut, apoyando a mujeres a que se lancen en la política. Y detrás de los estudios, varios estudios, notaron de que para convencer a un hombre a que se lance en la política, nomás toma, para los que me están escuchando, una persona que le hacen esa pregunta, ¿por qué no te lanzas? Y a las mujeres, por mayor parte, toma 8 personas para convencer a una mujer a que se lance en este país. Y esa persona para los hombres muchas veces es la persona que lo está viendo detrás del espejo, a uno mismo. Y esa conversación un par de años atrás y anoté de que sos una persona que tiene el centro del corazón a la comunidad desde el tiempo que te he conocido. Y tenés 2 hijos que son también jóvenes, tenés una familia joven. Y te pregunté a ti, ¿por qué no te lanzas? Y me dijiste, pues, yo tengo una familia joven y entiendo el sacrificio, las implicaciones del sacrificio en tener una familia joven. Y aquí estamos. Primero digo, felicidades. Felicidades por decir, sí, me voy a lanzar. Porque yo sé que mucha gente, tenías una lista de gente que querías convencer a las mujeres a que se lancen y dijiste, por fin, sí, cuando los demás te preguntan por qué no te lanzas. Y aquí estamos. Quiero saber cuál fue la inspiración de decir sí, por fin, y cuál es tu plan de trabajo apoyando a la comunidad de Fairhaven. And so, Sarah, I'd love to hear what inspired you to finally say yes.
Pues gracias por las preguntas. There are many inspiring women I've known in politics, including some strong local women who I've seen do really great work. But as you mentioned, I'm really not. It's not my personality to be out front. I really prefer to be behind the scenes, putting the pieces together, trying to find the right people for different positions. And there wasn't a specific inspiration as much as there was just frustration. We had 4 different alders in a row for Ward 14 that either left in the middle of their terms or were so absent that they might as well have left, including the most recent alder. And I've been very involved in my community, but we could see that the cost of that missing piece. It sort of accrued slowly over time in the form of missed funding, just missed opportunities of various kinds for the neighborhood. If you look at our Quinnipiac River Park, which is in my ward now, it's like falling into the river. And I feel like the neglect of that park it really shows you how bad the neglect has been over more than 8 years, really. So I just got frustrated. People had asked me to run before. They'd asked my husband to run before. We have a lot of leaders in our neighborhood, in our ward specifically, but we don't have a lot of people who've been willing to step up to be in local government. And I think, it's a tough, kind of thankless job to do. It's a lot of work. It's not a lot of money. You can't make it your full-time job, but it's a lot of responsibility to do it well.
And so I'm going to translate.
Okay, I'm going to pause.
Said.
Okay.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
La concejal Sarah dice de que por fin decidió, no tanto por inspiración, pero más por frustración, para decir la verdad, de que anotó en poco tiempo 4 diferentes personas que tenían el cargo de concejal de Fairhaven en esta parte del vecindario, se fueron o a un nivel estaban ausentes, no estaban presentes y causó una grande negligencia sobre las necesidades de la comunidad de esta parte de Fairhaven. Por ejemplo, hubo pérdida de oportunidades, pérdida de fondos que se pudo haber sido dirigidos a las necesidades de la comunidad, que son grandes. Por ejemplo, el parque Quinnipiac River del río Quinnipiac se estaba, en otras palabras, cayéndose al río. Necesitaba más ayuda, más atención, igual como la comunidad de Fairhaven. Yes, Sarah. And so you were speaking to ways in which the need was great and missed opportunities to address those needs were not happened because of the absence of representation.
Right. So, that's a lot of what an alder does is just pay attention to their ward, pay attention to the streets, the sidewalks that need replacing and fixing, pay attention to the benches that are missing in the park, and just be a street level presence. I walk a lot, so I'm always talking with the businesses and with the Emerge guys who clean Grand Avenue and the crossing guard in front of Fairhaven School, just to kind of keep a continuously in touch with the pulse of the neighborhood and how people are thinking and feeling and what the needs are. And that's what's been missing. So that's really the first thing that I want to do. The other thing that I really want to do is build a deeper leadership bench here. It's something that I really like doing is building teams. And so we have 2 new ward co-chairs here, and we're building out our ward committee and trying to create a stronger dynamic here of people who are working on different projects and know where to go and get support and get involved.
Entonces Sarah dice de que la responsabilidad de un concejal es bien grande y el pago es bien poco. Y el tiempo también, no hay mucho tiempo. Y la manera que Sarah le gusta ver en el mundo liderazgo es en equipo. Y con esa visión está formando un equipo de liderazgo para el vecindario 14 de votación, Ward 14. Y por el momento ya está trabajando con 2 co-directores de este equipo de liderazgo, y la responsabilidad de una persona que tiene el puesto de concejal aquí en Haven es en verdad centrado en tener el corazón abierto, los ojos abiertos y los oídos abiertos, en anotar el pulso de la comunidad y sus necesidades, inclusive caminando por parques, si hay bancos del parque rotos o si una luz no está funcionando, así anotando cuáles son las necesidades, inclusive trabajando con los pequeños negocios y anotando sus necesidades. Y es algo de que Sarah dice de que por muchos años personas han pedido que ella o su esposo a que se lancen para este puesto. And so there's a group now, you're creating this leadership group, which is a beautiful model, actually. And what you're saying is the more people in leadership, the more resources we have. Which is contrary to someone coming in and saying, I'm the leader, that's my title, what I say goes. I just want to highlight that.
Well, no one on the Board of Alders has much power on our own, right? It's 30 people. So the nature of the board is to work through consensus. And I mean, consensus is my favorite way to make decisions, but it's also the most time consuming. So it's, that's the work at the board level. But the same thing really applies in the neighborhood. So the Democratic Town Committee has everybody who lives in New Haven is represented by someone on the Board of Alders and also by a ward committee. If you're a Democrat, that can be up to 50 people. And so that's available to anybody who'd like to be involved in politics and just really the most local way. And I think that committee has not really. I was the co-chair before I was the alder, and we started that work when I was the co-chair, and we're continuing now. And a lot of the work that I did as part of the campaign, going door to door, I knocked, every door in the ward over the spring and summer and fall, was to identify leaders. So, especially on streets where we didn't have anybody identified. So we're now putting together a real team of people that is representative of the whole ward, so that we have people looking out for different parts of the community. And there's something happening in a part of the world that's farther away from where I live and I don't see it, we have somebody who will let us know and help us to identify what needs to happen.
Excellent. Y Sarah acaba de contar de que esta descripción de liderazgo viene de la infraestructura que existe aquí en New Haven. Cada persona que se lanza como concejal y los eligen tienen el derecho de trabajar con un grupo de líderes de su vecindario, el comité del vecindario, el ward, y pueden tener lo máximo como 50 personas parte de este comité de líderes, equipo de líderes del vecindario. Y antes de lanzarse para este puesto como concejal, estaba trabajando fuertemente para fortalecer ese equipo de miembros del vecindario, de este equipo de líderes de parte del comité del vecindario, el ward. Y sigue trabajando en eso ahora como concejal. Y la manera en que el concejal de New Haven, de nuestro municipio, funciona es en una manera de consentimiento. Es imposible implementar un plan sin el consentimiento de los demás del concejal, y son 30. Y entonces es una manera de trabajar bien importante, mantener consentimiento, no es de que una voz tiene más poder sobre el otro. Y de ahí está reflexionando consentimiento como un valor central del trabajo que hacen en el vecindario con un comité de líderes. Beautiful. That's beautiful.
It's a work in progress, but I'm excited about it. And I guess the other reason why I decided this was the time to do this is because there are just some needs that are really time sensitive. We've, I think, put off the real Main Street style development of Grand Avenue for a really long time. Anybody who's walked down Grand Avenue knows that it's full of restaurants and barbershops and it's really alive, but it doesn't always feel safe or welcoming, or like a community in the way that we would want it to feel. There's not lighting and planters and benches, and there's drug activity sometimes. There's sex work happening out in the open sometimes, and I think we really need to tackle that. An important piece of that is redeveloping the former Strong School building, which is at 69 Grand Avenue, which is a project that we've been working on for 10 years. It started under the DiStefano administration, then there was some efforts under the Harp administration, and I think we've actually made the most progress in the last 2 years. We put together a committee that I've been part of that's been working there were a bunch of community meetings with a consultant out of Brooklyn called Interborough who's been working with us to develop community criteria for the redevelopment of the building, building off some of the previous work. So we weren't recreating it, but just taking a fresh look at it because some of the work had been done a long time ago. So we're now toward the end of that initial phase of the process, and there's a preliminary report that will be released soon with the consultants providing a few redevelopment scenarios, and that will be the basis of a new RFP that will go out. So once we have a developer in place for the former Strong School, it will be like an anchor for the redevelopment of all of Grand Avenue.
Amazing. And this was happening for a very long time. And talk about being able to impact the community. This huge building, empty for many years, but good bones. It has good bones and empty, and the need is great. And the community has been saying, we need this, we need this, we need this. And finally, even seeing that it's getting to the point of possibly having an RFP issued out, request for proposals, and getting someone to say, hey, I commit to work with the community in delivering on the vision and opening the doors.
Yeah, and I would say we've had an RFP in the past, but one of the things that Fairhaven has suffered from is really low expectations. So the city brought in this developer who had a plan that didn't make any sense, and who had a really poor track record. And so instead of rowing together, we had to fight against that proposal. And we don't want to do that. We want to be working collaboratively, having a shared vision, and working together to try to implement that vision. So we have had rounds of RFP, but I'm much more confident about this round producing something that we can all be excited about.
Beautiful. La alcalde Sarah dice de que en este momento es un momento de tiempos bien sensitivos. Hay muchos asuntos impactando lamentablemente negativamente a la comunidad de Fairhaven. Por ejemplo, cuando uno camina por la calle Grand Avenue, ve todo tipo de problemas, inclusive trabajadores de sexo allí en la luz, y gente vendiendo drogas. Hay muchos problemas, y la necesidad de el desarrollo de la comunidad, tener un plan y tener expectativas altas, no bajas. Por ejemplo, en el caso del desarrollo de la escuela Strong, ahí en Fairhaven, un edificio grande, vacío por años, pero tiene una fundación fuerte. Pueden construir algo y tener más recursos para la comunidad, para el bienestar de la comunidad. Y ha sido una situación de estar vacío más de 10 años. En la calle Grand Avenue número 69, esa escuela ha tenido un proceso donde se ha pedido a personas con fondos y sabiduría en desarrollar un plan para ver qué se puede hacer con esa escuela. Y en el pasado, el vecindario ha tenido bajas expectativas. Y ahora van a empezar un nuevo esfuerzo en desarrollar algo en esa escuela con más grandes expectativas, y esperan poder recibir un reporte sobre cuáles son las barreras que tienen que enfrentar en la construcción, por ejemplo, reconstrucción de ese edificio, tener más o menos mejor idea al día del costo de desarrollar algo nuevo ahí y de allí poder hacer un pedido para la comunidad, los profesionales que hacen desarrollo en las comunidades, para que nos digan qué es lo que ellos pueden hacer y a qué costo, y que la comunidad decida cuál plan de acción van a implementar y con quién. Y ha sido largo tiempo en esa conversación para la gente de Fairhaven, del Distrito 14. Y ya vamos a regresar después de esta breve pausa con la concejal Sarah Miller. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. In 5 minutes, when you hear Spanish, do not turn that dial. We'll be right back with our Ward 14 Alderwoman Sarah Miller.
Prepárense para obtener su licencia de conducir en Connecticut. Ahora en New Haven, preparamos a personas indocumentadas y documentadas. Las clases son de 8 horas obligatorias por el Departamento de Motores y Vehículos. Y estas clases incluyen drogas y alcohol y técnicas para manejar de manera segura. Estas clases también incluyen un manual para el estudio para pasar el examen escrito y 100 preguntas que posiblemente estén en el examen. ¿Por qué? Porque a nosotros nos interesa que usted pase el examen a la primera vez que lo tome. 51 de Elm Street, Suite 307, tercer piso, New Haven, Connecticut. Código postal 06510. El número de teléfono 203-376-0864 o el 203-907-0361. Las clases son miércoles y jueves. Estamos certificados por el Departamento de Motores y Vehículos DMV del estado de Connecticut. Ahora es el tiempo y el momento.
La Voz Hispana de Connecticut, el único periódico que cubre las noticias locales de todas las ciudades del estado. Noticias que tienen que ver con el quehacer político, educativo, económico y social de la comunidad hispana de Connecticut. Los mejores articulistas y reporteros, el mejor contenido editorial. La Voz Hispana, la voz de todos, la voz del pueblo.
Chancletas, bronceados y cerveza. Eso sucede durante las vacaciones de primavera. Decenas de jóvenes se van a recargar sus baterías antes de exámenes finales. Para muchos, esto quiere decir un viaje a la playa, mientras que otros optan por algo local. Los Centros para el Control y Prevención de Enfermedades tienen algunos consejos de seguridad. Sea consciente y no beba mucho alcohol. El alcohol no solo perjudica tu juicio, puede ser mortal si decides ponerte detrás del volante. La combinación de alcohol y el sol puede llevar a la deshidratación y empeora los efectos de beber alcohol como quemaduras. Asegúrate de proteger tu piel. Siempre lleva protector solar de al menos 15 FPS cuando estés afuera. Si estás tomando, trata de quedarte en la sombra. Asegúrate de estar con un grupo de amigos confiables. Los ambientes festivos mezclados con grandes multitudes y alcohol en una localidad no familiar puede ser una receta de peligro. Y mantén tu teléfono cargado en todo momento. Seguir estas simples reglas esta primavera puede marcar la diferencia entre unas vacaciones memorables o unas vacaciones que prefieras olvidar. Ana María Parra, CNN, Atlanta.
WNHH 103.5. La voz hispana de Connecticut.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. We're here with our Alderwoman, Ward 14, Fairhaven, Sarah Miller. Aquí estamos de vuelta con nuestra concejal del vecindario 14 de votación, Sarah Miller, hablando sobre su primer año de ser elegida aquí como alcaldesa de concejal, perdón. Maybe I'm projecting into the future. Our alderwoman Sarah Miller, we were talking about some of the issues that the needs in Ward 14 that have been neglected due to various reasons of having absent representation in Fairhaven. And so there are a lot of needs, and we talked a little bit about the Strong School and the work that's been happening underway. And there are a few other issues I know that made the New Haven Independent News for a bit. The Grand Cafe issue, public safety issues. Love to touch base on that with you, que hay varios asuntos impactando negativamente a la comunidad, el vecindario de 14 de votación en Fairhaven, y la concejal tiene bastante trabajo que hacer, pero en equipo con un comité de un equipo trabajando fuerte para cambiar estas situaciones. Una de ellas también que se vio en las noticias sobre una barra que se llama Grand Café por la calle Grand Avenue, y aumentó lamentablemente riesgos de seguridad, el bienestar física de personas caminando o estando cerca de esa parte de Grand Avenue. ¿Nos puedes hablar un poco sobre qué pasos han tomado que va a cambiar esa situación? What are some of the steps that you've taken that has, or in your leadership team has taken, that has promised changes to the public safety situation in Grand Cafe?
Sure. So there's a lot to be done on public safety, and I think, overall the frustration has been that I don't really see a public safety strategy that is getting us to a better place anytime soon. So hopefully that's something that's coming. But what we have seen over time is just hotspots in the neighborhood, and they're usually tied to a store or a restaurant, or in some cases a private, like, apartment building where there's dealing going on, or sex work going on. And so we know where these places are, and the Grand Cafe happens to be the one that's closest to my house, that the parking lot is like an open air drug and prostitution market. That's the way it's been. It got really, really bad last summer. I mean, so bad that there were multiple violent incidents out in the parking lot and inside the cafe. And there was one night in early September when we were driving home, and my 10-year-old said to me from the back seat, "Don't tell me it's another shooting at the Grand Cafe." And you don't realize how much kids absorb. And, my kids are 10 and 7 now. And they've really, not directly, but just having them was what got me off the couch, 10 years ago, to get involved in this work in the first place. But those words from my son were what made me decide that we really need to do something about that bar. And I teamed up with some other strong women in our neighborhood, and we decided that we were going to interrupt what was going on there. And during the month of September, we had art and music, and sometimes just people sitting, talking every night to create a different dynamic in that space. And while it was happening, we didn't have any major violent incidents in that area. And at the same time, we collected signatures to petition the state liquor commission to revoke the liquor license for the cafe, which did happen. What are we in? February, earlier this month? It wasn't that long ago that it happened. They've already appealed. So we know that the Grand Cafe is appealing, and we'll have to go through that process. But for now, they're shut down. And that spot is still known in the neighborhood as a spot to go get drugs. So it's better now, but it will take a while for it to be, for it to really be cleaned up. But we've definitely made progress by having that that cafe closed. And now we need to work on other spots in the neighborhood, some of which are within my ward and some of which aren't. We did a smaller scale intervention on Chamber Street. The Chambers and Ferry is also another hotspot in the neighborhood that we need to work on. And so we'll just continue to look at each one by one. Everyone is a different story, needs a different sort of response, working with the neighbors that are immediately around those spots and involving them in the solution. So that's what we'll continue to do. I'm sorry, I spoke too long.
No, that's great. I took notes. La
Okay.
concejal Sarah estaba hablando un poco sobre uno de los primeros pasos que tomaron en asegurar, aumentar la seguridad de la gente del vecindario, y una de esas situaciones será de la barra Grand Café en la calle Grand Avenue. Lamentablemente, en la parte donde existía el estacionamiento para este negocio, ahí era donde uno anotaba varios incidentes de violencia a luz plena, vendiendo drogas o sexo. Y uno de esos días, después de recoger a su hijo de la escuela, su hijo de 10 años dijo: "Oh, mamá, no me digas, otro tiroteo por la barra Grand Café". Y ahí se dio cuenta la influencia, lamentablemente, de la realidad, de la falta de seguridad en el vecindario propio, en donde sus hijos también están viviendo. Y hace 10 años, reconociendo la importancia de tener un impacto positivo, fue lo que le lanzó fuera de su sala, enfrente de la tele, apagó la tele para hacer un cambio, porque reconociendo que era bien importante apoyar a tener un mejor vecindario para sus hijos. Y lo que logró con varias mujeres fuertes del vecindario, lograron retomar control de esa parte de Fairhaven donde Grand Café se estacionaba, y crear nueva energía, teniendo música, teniendo arte. Y por esos días que tomaron control sobre esa parte del vecindario, bajó bastante la violencia, había paz. Pero después que terminaron con eso, aumentó, regresó a algunas cosas, pero por lo menos interrumpieron un poco en septiembre esa dinámica y crearon una oportunidad de tener una nueva visión para lo que puede ser esa parte de Grand Avenue. Y tomaron la oportunidad de colectar para una petición los nombres, firmas de personas presentes para hacer una petición al Estado a revocar la licencia de vender alcohol de Grand Café, y cerraron las puertas temporariamente, pero en febrero Grand Café apeló y están luchando para abrir de nuevo las puertas. Y en este momento pueden pedir la comunidad debe de mantener el ojo abierto para asegurarse de que no van a poder renovar su licencia para poder vender. Y poco a poco la concejal Sarah dice: hay que trabajar en diferentes áreas donde uno ve el impacto negativo de violencia y otras cosas que en verdad pone a riesgo la seguridad de nuestra comunidad, de nuestras familias, de nuestra gente, y hay que trabajar de una área, hacer el impacto, de ahí moverse a otra área, hacer el impacto. Y hay veces que partes no son parte del vecindario de votación 14, pero otras partes de Fairhaven también, incluyendo una de las áreas va a ser de vencer el riesgo de seguridad es Chamber y Ferry. Hay que trabajar en esa parte y hay otras partes también. And so there's a lot of work around public safety. That alone could be a job unto itself. And I know that the school system, our public schools, is an issue that's near and dear to you as well. Can you share a little bit more about that as well? Que si puedes hablar un poco sobre el asunto de apoyando el rendimiento de nuestros jóvenes en las escuelas públicas de New Haven.
Sure. I love your translation. Thanks for translating. I know how hard it is.
You're welcome.
So my kids, I went through the New Haven public schools, and my kids have been at what used to be called Columbus Family Academy. It's now called Family Academy of Multilingual Exploration since pre-K, since they are 3 and they're now 7 and 10. And I started identifying challenges at the school pretty much immediately, often with teachers as allies, but not really figuring out how to solve them. Problems with curriculum, problems with culture, problems with how money was being spent and how decisions were being made. And I was part of a group that.
Someone's at the front door. Oh,
is that you? No problem.
Yes, but I need to.
You need to go? Okay.
No. This is multitasking in this world, but do continue.
Okay. So that group called New Haven Public School Advocates came together. It started with 2 moms from me and another mom, Fatima Rojas, from our school, trying to put some pressure on the district to make the changes we want to see. Since a lot of the changes you really can't make at the classroom or school level, you really need to make them at the district level. And the Board of Alders doesn't have statutory authority other than over the board. Can't tell the board, the board, you need to teach this curriculum or you need to change this budget line. We just vote the budget up or down. But the education committee I've worked with through the years, I think really effectively to elevate issues and to start conversations that need to be held. Do you want me to pause or? Okay.
Sí, las escuelas públicas es bien importante, de grande interés para la concejal Sarah, especialmente tomando en cuenta que ella misma también fue un estudiante en las escuelas de New Haven y ahora sus hijos están ingresados en las escuelas públicas de New Haven desde 3 años de edad en pre-kinder y ahora tienen 10 años y 7 años de edad y anota de que el concejal de New Haven no tiene control ni poder sobre el comité de educación de las escuelas públicas de New Haven, la Junta de Educación de las Escuelas Públicas de New Haven, pero el comité de educación del concejal lo que sí pueden hacer es elevar como prioridad ciertos asuntos o temas. Y una de las razones que le importa tanto es sobre los años siempre ha tratado de trabajar durante el tiempo que sus hijos han estado ingresados en las escuelas públicas de New Haven, ha tratado de trabajar como aliada a los maestros y hablando sobre temas de presupuesto, la cultura de las escuelas, el rendimiento, el plan de rendimiento de los estudiantes. Y es bien importante elevar los asuntos detrás del Comité de Educación del concejal. And so, yes, please continue.
Gracias. So, for example, a few years ago, we held a hearing on play and inquiry-based early learning, which is something that was sort of stripped out of the schools through No Child Left Behind and standardized testing and stuff. And you had kindergartners who really didn't have much time to play during the day, which we know is not developmentally appropriate. So we helped to organize a hearing on that topic with the Board of Alders. that began the process of shifting the curriculum, which is still happening now. But that's an example of how the board can be involved in changing some of the conversations around our schools. So I think some of the things that we have to work on now include mental health and how we just deal with all the stress that everybody is under, all the changes that COVID has made in our lives, and not just go back to our old normal, but really acknowledge that we're in a new situation and people have more needs than they did before, and really try to address those needs. The other thing, especially for La Voz listeners, is thinking about how we can invest more broadly in dual language. My children go to a dual language school where half of their day is in English and half of their day is in Spanish. And those programs were set up, and then they were just kind of left, and there hasn't been a lot of investment in maintaining them. They're more expensive, but when they're done well, in middle school, it's difficult to have an English-speaking science teacher and a Spanish-speaking science teacher, but that's what the model really calls for. So if we want to do it right, we really need to invest in that and think about the benefits for all children, not just children who speak Spanish at home. Also, just services for Latino families, bilingual communications, translation services at meetings. Whenever you really put the call out, you learn how isolated a lot of people are and how they feel like they don't have somebody at the front desk they can talk to. They don't know how to talk to their children's teacher. Our school is incredibly sensitive to that because of the population, but not everybody experiences that. So that's something we could look at. The other thing that always comes up that I think is worth mentioning is that, we have under 40% of our kids reading on grade level. And it's not just us, it's all the urban districts. But I think we need to be real about why that's happening and have higher standards for our kids and figure out how we shift. Is it how we're teaching? Is it the way we're teaching? Is it some combination of the two? And how can we really address that head on rather than just continuing to ignore it year after year, which is usually what happens.
Thank you.
So I think those are some of the things that we can help to elevate as the board.
Sí, y por ejemplo, los temas que quieren elevar como el comité educativo del concejal de New Haven, sea la junta directiva de las escuelas públicas de New Haven. Uno de esos temas es sobre la instrucción bilingüe. Nosotros aquí en New Haven hay escuelas que supuestamente dan instrucción bilingüe, pero lamentablemente no han invertido los fondos adecuados para en realidad tener de alta calidad instrucción en inglés y en español, por ejemplo. Sí cuesta más mantener instrucción en dos idiomas en el salón de clase. Por ejemplo, el modelo dice lo ideal es tener un instructor en inglés y otro instructor en español, un maestro en inglés y otro en español. Y eso no se encuentra en este momento, pero los beneficios son bien altos cuando se implementa el modelo en la manera que se debe de ser. Y no solamente son beneficios para los latinos, los quienes hablan español, pero también brinda beneficios para los demás que no vienen de hogares donde hablan español. Y otro asunto que quiere elevar son servicios bilingües directamente para apoyar a las familias que hablan, por ejemplo, español. Una de las cosas, siendo concejal y trabajando directamente con familias como voluntaria antes de ser concejal, anotó de que hay un gran aislamiento dentro de las familias que hablan español como su primer idioma por falta de no tener traducción en las escuelas de New Haven, no poder hablar, por ejemplo, con los maestros de sus propios hijos y no tener esa comprensión con ellos por falta de no tener el idioma. y quiere aumentar los servicios bilingües para eliminar ese aislamiento. Y los estudios enseñan cuando los padres no se pueden involucrar, lamentablemente disminuye el rendimiento académico del estudiante, el avance de su propio hijo cuando los padres no pueden mantenerse al día de lo que está pasando en las escuelas. And so, based on research, best practices, parent engagement is closely connected to the academic success of children. And when parents can't simply engage because they don't have the language, they are not able to communicate in English and the teachers can't communicate in their language. That's a huge loss of academic success for students. Y otra parte, se nota de que una área donde tuvieron un gran éxito es en la parte para los jóvenes en las escuelas por tener nuevas metas en pasar exámenes estándares. Lamentablemente para los niños pequeños en las escuelas eliminaron el tiempo de jugar, pero cuando uno anota el desarrollo del niño, poder jugar es una manera que los niños de temprana edad aprenden varias habilidades que son bien importantes para su éxito como adulto. Y tuvieron que hacer una petición para que las escuelas públicas de New Haven pongan el tiempo, una prioridad, el tiempo de jugar para los niños de temprana edad. Y otros asuntos que quieren elevar es sobre salud mental, reconociendo el estrés es bien fuerte en nuestra comunidad, en nuestras familias, especialmente por la situación de la pandemia de COVID, y reconocer que ahora estamos todos en una nueva situación con nuevas necesidades, más necesidades, y las escuelas públicas tienen que ponerse al día sobre cómo dirigirse a esas necesidades de nuestra comunidad. Y lamentablemente se nos cortó el tiempo con la concejal Sarah del vecindario 14 de Fairhaven. And sad to say, we are out of time with our Alderwoman Sarah Miller from Ward 14 of Fairhaven. But before we leave, would you have anything else you'd like to share with the public, to our listeners?
Sure. I thought it might be helpful to just say that, through the years, I've had my criticisms of my alders and of the board of alders. And I think there's an inherent challenge with the citizen legislature. It's not a full-time job. We're in the real world. And the goal is that you bring that real world perspective to the work. But there's only so many hours in the day, and after you go to work and attend to your family and attend just the meetings of the board, there really isn't much left. So I think it's, everybody I've seen on the board is incredibly dedicated and hardworking. I think certainly hold us accountable. But I also want to just encourage people to get to know your alder, ask your alder what you can do to support them, ask if you can join the ward committee, whatever it is that keeps you up at night. Ask your alder how you can work on that issue in partnership with him or her and be part of the solution. I think it's easy to criticize and harder to do the work. So I just invite people to be part of doing the work in partnership with your alder.
Y ya se nos terminó el tiempo, pero las últimas palabras de hoy del concejal Sarah Miller-Cruz es la invitación a que todos tomen el tiempo para conocer a su concejal local, que lo conozcan mejor, que sean voluntarios a un comité de trabajo de liderazgo del vecindario del concejal, y si tienen tiempo para ser parte de la solución. Y es importante tener un poquito más de compasión para nuestros concejales, porque aquí en la ciudad de New Haven no es tiempo completo y el pago es bien poco y la responsabilidad es bien grande después de reuniones del concejal y después de pasar tiempo con la comunidad y con las responsabilidades de tiempo de trabajo completo en otra parte y con la familia de uno, hay bien poco tiempo para hacer todo lo que la comunidad necesita. Por eso necesitamos ser parte de la solución y levanzar la mano y en vecindario 14 con Sarah Miller hay personas que ayudan en español y en inglés. Entonces, de todos los idiomas, bienvenidos a ser parte del comité, del concejal del vecindario 14 de Fairhaven. And so I just wanted to highlight that your committee, Ward 14, runs bilingually is something that I noted, and it's really special and unique in that way. And so thank you, Councilwoman, Board of Alderwoman Sarah, and your family for the sacrifices on the behalf of the community. And thank you to all those who are part of your Ward 14 committee, leadership committee, including Fátima Rojas. Mil gracias a todos que son parte del comité de liderazgo del vecindario 14 de Fairhaven. Y gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us.
Always good to talk with you.
Likewise.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll have more shows for you. Next Monday, we'll be back with Juntos Podemos Together We Can, where we celebrate co-creators of a kinder and more just world.